There we go. There we go. All right. Welcome back to the Healing Conversation. Tonight's topic is power versus force, discerning truth in a world of lies. And I think it's appropriate to sort of lay a little bit of groundwork here. The day the channel opened for me, this day my mom died, and I was able to make peace with my, soul contract with my mom. Something opened up, and I'm going to pull up the recording and share it with you guys at some point, because I haven't listened to it in a couple of years, and there's more to what came through in this download. But the key elements of this download was that we were coming into time where truth would become lies and lies would become truth, and that it was in service to, again, life happening for us, not to us. It was in service to helping us reattune to our inner guidance system, to begin to trust our inner knowing above and beyond anything that comes from outside of us. And the second half of that, and not to be separate from, but as a part of, was this understanding that it would be the storytellers that would bring us home, that telling the truth of our stories out loud would be the way that we would begin to go inward to that place of recognition of where truth comes from. And so for the last 7+ years now, I've been living in this space of trust for my inner guidance system. And I've been feeling into books, feeling into speakers and teachers. And I'm not somebody who really has ever followed a guru. I've had close relationships with really powerful medicine people. I went through a year-long initiation into the Dogra shamanic practices of West Africa. And I've learned so much from so many different people, but I haven't ever felt like the wisdom was out there. It was always that what I heard from out there was something that confirmed what I already felt in my own belly. And so maybe that started early on from my wounding, that I didn't really trust things outside of myself, that I only trusted my inner wisdom. It was true all the years I worked with the accounting profession. I didn't have a college degree, and yet I created something out of my belly that turned out to be incredibly appropriate and valuable to that constituency, and served it up in a way that was uniquely my own. And I think this process is the same, that when we're giving birth to a new story, a new reality, we can only bring it from the inside out, not the outside in. And so this idea of truth and lies has been a deep resonance for me, probably since my childhood, since my early wounding, like not trusting the lie of everything's okay around us when I knew something was off. And I'd felt that, and I know, Kent, you and I've spoken a lot about this, that there's this deep recognition that we're not living up to our truth in the way that we are expressing ourselves on the planet right now. So this is something that I think is a note of resonance in a lot of people, that there is a mistrust is not exactly true, because that implies wounding as a key component, but more to the point, a misalignment of who we know where we are to be, beings of love and light, and how the world is manifesting right now. So that this dissonance, this separation of who I believe we are and how the world is showing up, has had a big grinding effect on me. And it's caused me to ask different questions. And I think I said in one of the earlier sessions that those of us who ask those bigger questions are part of the answer crew. Like, this is the Jeopardy, and we're both Alex Trebek and the guest panel of participants. This is where the power of our ability to manifest a world that aligns with our source code of love lies in both the questions we ask and the answers that we are willing to show up to give. And this is a big movement in the advancement of human consciousness. And so this book, Power and Force, was recommended to me about 3 years ago. It sat on my shelf, and each time I'd go to feel into what's the next book, because Stephen and I have a morning practice. We read together every morning, and we've just worked our way through a whole bunch of really cool books. Sometimes we'll just have a lark and do a novel, but mostly we've read books on consciousness and the expansion of human potential. And it's been a great gift and a bonding between the two of us. But this book just wasn't right. I passed it over like 4 or 5 times, but we picked it up a couple months ago, and we're working our way through a chapter every day. And as I've been reading it, it's like, oh, I know why it was not right until just now. And so what I want to share with you is, I have felt from the very start that the power of language to create our world is absolute. If you view a situation and the language that comes through is, oh, isn't that awful, then you will see the awful things about it. If the language that comes through is, how do I solve for X? X equals love, then something else comes through. That an early mentor of mine said that every day, he says, I want you to think about this. The power of questions you ask of your life will determine the quality of life you get to live. I'll say that again. The power of questions you ask yourself every day about how you want to live your life. So he would start off his day. We had morning questions and evening questions. And the morning questions went something like this. What are the most amazing ways that you can show up today? What is going to be awesome about how your day is going to go? Just all starting out with an expectation of positivity, light. And at the end of the day, instead of beating myself when things didn't go right, it would be more questions like, okay, what wasn't perfect? And what would you like to be perfect tomorrow? How much, what are you willing to focus on in order for things to evolve differently than today? So it was always moving me forward, moving me higher up the ladder of acceptance, but also, the sense that I had control over my life, my outcome. And so when I saw this meme, I think it really resonated for me because of that. I started to be free when I discovered the cage was made of thoughts. And so if thoughts create our reality, then words are the structure of that reality. And our ability to shift consciousness, to move from a fear-based construct to a love-based construct, is absolutely tied to how we individually think, and then how we move into collective awareness with those thoughts. And then from there, we begin to manifest a whole different reality for ourselves. And I've done vision boards, and those vision boards, I look at them now. In fact, they're behind me on the wall. They're always present in my awareness. About everything I've ever put on a vision board has come true. And so there's something about the quality of visioning work you do to create those boards, but even more to the point, just asking not for things, but a sense of what you want your world to look like has created the world that I wanted for myself. And so I believe, and maybe you guys can jump in on this and tell me if you believe that we have some power to manifest our own reality. Is life happening to you or for you? Anybody want to jump in? Karen, do we have power to manifest our own reality?
Absolutely. And for me, it's been a thinning out of judgment, where I do self-judgment, and but I don't think that it's self-judgment when I'm judging somebody else. And so I've worked on, I'm working continually on seeing the good right off the bat, instead of making that quick assessment that's a judgmental thing. And as I've worked on that, I'm conscious of the fact that I'm clearing my own self-judgment, and vice versa. So doing that has really changed how I go about the world. And that's where the power comes in, is feeling comfort in seeing all the good out there. Not that that's all the time, but that's what I'm working towards. It's so much more comfortable and enjoyable and exciting to discover some unique beauty or attribute in other people where maybe initially you have a judgment about.
I'm going to emphasize a couple of words you said in there, because I think it's really, we don't give enough credit to the importance of feeling good about how we think about things. Like the choice to choose to see the world in a more positive, loving light is not just, an act of Dale Carnegie positivity. It is a way that aligns with, makes my body feel better. It makes my day go better. It makes my reality kinder and more loving. It supports me versus holding false positivity and or moving into negativity, because I feel that in my body too. Like we often will say our attitudes can create grief and sadness in our own bodies, but we don't give ourselves the benefit of creating a mental construct that feels better in our bodies. Like we do you know what I'm saying? Is that making sense to you? How much power we have over how we feel? Kent, you want to jump in there?
Well, for me, I've always been quick to jump to judgment, and I think that's kind of what Karen touched on with what she said. That for me, it's just to step back and observe, not only myself and the way I react, but the way other people do as well. That's been my biggest hurdle for me. So I don't know if that really fits in, but just, just observing rather than snapping to judgments or reacting, because negative thoughts don't need to cause negative reactions. If you just observe.
Right. So there's observing, and then there's even a step further, and that is observing through a lens of love. So there's a neutral lens, there's a negative lens, and then there's a positive lens. Does that make sense? There's sort of a spectrum of perception that can apply to any situation. Two people can experience the same wildfire, and one is devastated for life, and another says, okay, here's the opportunity to rebuild, right? So there's, life happens for me, not to me. Observer mode can be very neutral. Lens of love mode, and you're helping me unpack this right now, Kent, is a step even higher. It's observer with the totality of life, not just that moment of life. It's the lens of love is so broad, it encompasses everything, whereas observer might be only what's happening in the field around me. So that lens of love takes even a very negative situation and creates an opportunity for growth, creates an opportunity for acceptance on a soul level of what's happening. Even if I, in my human ego avatar, is struggling with something, if I can get to a soul level of what's happening, the DNA of the moment rather than the trauma moment of that moment, I have a better experience of my life. I'm not just neutral, but I'm kind of, I read something this week that talked about to create the meaning for your life that takes even suffering to a high art of acceptance. To be able to look at suffering through a lens of appreciation for its role in moving us forward towards greater levels of consciousness, that's the lens of love versus I'm not going to get sucked into the trauma drama. I'm going to stay out here and observe. That is a very healthy place to be. But for us to make this, and it's truly a quantum leap forward in human consciousness, we have to step back even further. We have to hold the biggest expanded view of this human experience, our existence in this universe through the lens of love, that everything, and I did a TED talk on this, and I got some pushback from people because they got really upset with the idea that everything happens for a reason. Oh, you mean so-and-so was raped for a reason, or so-and-so was killed in a car accident for a reason? And that's going into the detail of what happens, the trauma. The reason piece, in order to hold it through the lens of love, has to be so broad that we are able to see the ocean of the motion and not the roll of the wave, not the crash of the wave. Do you know what I'm saying? That there's a tidal flow of momentum to the human experience that encompasses it all. The weather, the drama, the sense of insanity that's out there, all of it is the crash of the wave. But what we're paying attention to is the bigger construct of the ocean. And so that brought me to a real point of gratitude with this book from David Hawkins, because I had used his slide previously, and some of you have seen me refer to this slide, but it's taking on a whole new level of importance in the healing conversation. Because notice the title of this body of work that is coming through me. It's, I kept trying to change the name. I've told you this story, calling it something else, something that was more marketable, more clickable. But it kept coming back to, this is a conversation, and it's the word conversation that has so many layers of understanding. It's a dialogue, and I so appreciated the feedback I got last week from Sierra about that. It's also about conversing, about the words that we use and how we use them. And I have a team of people that I work with on the app, and this whole, we're kind of holding space for this bigger construct to appear in our mental construct. And one of the things that is clear to us is the lexicon of language. How we use language, how we approach language, how we unpack language is a major stepping stone in that quantum leap of consciousness. It's the recognition that language matters. And there's a book I read several years ago that had an equal imprint on me that's resonating right along with this power versus force. And it's The Alphabet versus a Goddess by Dr. Leonard Shlain. And he spoke in rich detail with all the history to back it up, and science on top of that. He's an MD, PhD, word nerd. And he wanted to know, sort of the history of language and how our language became such a tool of construction, of construct building in our story. And he went back and looked at that through the lens of deity, through the lens of divinity, through the lens of the patriarchy and the feminine. And what he found is in our early development as a species on this planet, we had multiple deities. We were balanced between masculine and feminine. We had goddesses, we had gods. They worked together. There wasn't this, oppression. But it was when language took the leap forward from being oral to written that it took on a whole different construct of power, because it could be mass dissemination. You could write a word and there was no limit to where that word could go at that point. It didn't have to be within the sound of your resonance. It could move beyond. So now all of a sudden we go from individual conversations to a conversation with our reality through the written word. And because women were home having babies, the word keepers were men. They were priests and scribes and scholars, and they began to write the story of our divinity through a very masculine lens and wrote the feminine right out of it. And then those words were used and put into the category of, divinity and therefore power. But really what they were words of force. And religion and the Bible and many of the written texts have been edited so heavily by men and institutions that they left out all the good part of the story and they hung on to the fear-based part of the story. So language is powerful, really, really powerful. And that book, Alphabet and the Goddess, began to create a sensitivity in me to pay attention to words. And you've heard me talk about words that I feel are part of the doctrine of dominion, DOD, also known as Department of Defense. So think about those two ideas. The doctrine of dominion and Department of Defense, DOD, is the patriarchy. And these words like sovereignty over wholeness, love versus fear. I mean, there's intrinsic understanding of what those words are. And Dr. Hawkins has done his whole life's work around this sensitivity. And so what he did was he took words and he began to use applied kinesiology. I'm sure some of you have had this, you've done this with your naturopath or your holistic practitioner. They'll have you hold a medicine to your chest and then do muscle testing, right? Kinesiological, or you use your fingers and is it true and you can be strong, or is it, you make statements and based on the viability, the truth, the falseness of that statement, you get stronger or weaker. So there is intrinsic to the human body this ability to discern truth, to feel truth viscerally in our bodies. There's a resonance because we're wired from source code of love, and truth and love are the same thing. Truth is the embodiment, using the word embody very deliberately, the physical manifestation of love in a physical world. Living in accordance with truth is living in accordance with love. So when I got the first download and they were coming to a point where truth will become lies, lies will become truth, that ignited this awareness in me about where do we find truth? How do we reboot to truth? How do we reboot to love? How do we step out of this fear-based construct and step into, and really, it's not even step into, just be what we've always been, which is a physical manifestation of love, exploring all of its facets in a physical realm. Love being God, love being divinity. I found in my Facebook feed this week the first coinage made in the United States designed by Ben Franklin. And on one side it says, not in God we trust, but we are one. We are one. And somehow later on in the story, in God we trust, the whole religious ideological supremacy began to weave itself into our way of being. And so I want to just gloss over what Dr. Hawkins talks about, but I've also felt this, that the United States, people will say we are the chosen ones, that we somehow in the United States, the concept of the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the languaging, the words used in the Constitution, even though we weren't yet living up to all men are created equal when we had, human chattel still as part of our construct, but the idea of living in a higher state of consciousness with each other, that we are here to serve the we in government, not the me of government. And so the whole idea that the United States has represented to the world for the longest time, since its inception, a new idea of self-governance, a new idea of expansion, that people have intrinsic value, not to the system, but in and of themselves. And that was something that the United States of America and our Constitution and all the things that we kind of take for granted about how we get to live our lives in this country, even though it's not perfect, it has so much potentiality baked into its DNA that's part of the painful dissonance too. Like right now, what's happening around us is coming to a crescendo. You can feel it. I have forever been somebody who reads not just good books, but also I read the tarot leaves and tea leaves of what's happening around us as part of the study of the motion of the ocean, not getting caught up in the crash of the wave, although that happens too once in a while. The United States is at a tipping point of trust. And so that red line that you see on this map of consciousness, I just want you to feel into what it means when we start to trust that our Constitution, our early vision of what it would be like to create a heaven on earth for humans, has some value to it, that it's worth showing up for, that it's worth holding on to, that we don't let this, they call it the grand experiment, after thousands of years of dictatorships and authoritarian regimes and, destroying the planet, destroying each other and othering and victims and oppressors, and the whole patriarchal story of doctrine of dominion, that Department of Defense. And what they're defending is against fear. They're defending against the uncertainty of what it would be like to just trust that humans could do the right thing for each other. There's our policies, our institutions, our legislation should all be in service to building a construct that is in alignment with our human biology of trust. But we're not there yet. And somebody posted something on a thing I showed up with today and said, it's worse than ever. And I push back on that a little bit. I don't think we're worse than ever. I think we are actually doing better than we've ever done in terms of being able to reach more people, and crime rates are actually down, and poverty is down, and we're getting better at this. And where we're struggling is fear wants to cling to the old story because it's what is known. It's where they have this sense of control. But as David Hawkins has so beautifully mapped out here, control and fear and hate and anxiety and all of these words resonate at 200 and below. And where we want to be to tip into this higher state of consciousness, where there's this beautiful me-we balance between individual expression and communal well-being, this quantum leap out of the construct of fear into the construct of love. We're right at it. The United States is right at it, and we are the tip of the spear of consciousness by design of our DNA from the very start. It's not that our country is doing the best at this. No, in fact, other countries are far better than we are. But we have an influence across the world that others are recognizing. So some things came into my field this week that are hard, really hard. I don't like to share the dark stuff. But there's just so many ways. We already know that Pachamama, we've reached a tipping point with her already. And so now we're in a state of adaptation and movement of our sense of certainty about where this, give you an example. Stephen and I spoke with our financial planner this week on Zoom, and he was showing us, because I'm not working, I'm not making any money. And that's way sooner than we thought I was going to retire. But I moved into a state of INE a couple of years ago, and it's I'm just not pulling my weight according to the financial planning charts. And I said, well, how long have you got us living? And he says, oh, I got you down to 95. That's what, the actuarials have put down for, people like you. And and he says, you keep going the way you're going, you're going to be out of money in 20 years. And I looked at Stephen when we got off the phone. I said, I don't think we're going to be here in 20 years. I think we're okay. We can spend however we want to. And he had shared with me this story about a woman he knows who basically said, I'm going to spend my money. And at the end of it all, I can go for 15 years living a very rich life, not super uber rich, but rich enough that she was enjoying it. She was traveling. And she says, at the end of it all, I'll sell my house. And then I'll be in retirement mode, and I'll be okay. And that was her plan, not to make it last till she was 95, but make it last for 15 years so that she could have life. Right. And so I was tripping on this idea of financial planning against the downside of running out, the fear of running out, right? And so because we're afraid of running out, we aren't living in the now. We're living for the future, not for the moment. And our entire way of orienting around money and security has created this fear-based construct. And those who are in that deep fear have this sense that the only way to maintain enough to get them to the end without running out, because we're so afraid of death and dying, because we don't understand it as a transition, but as a failing somehow, they are forcing their energy into our construct in a major way, so that we've got this very polarized, right, wrong, black, white, good, bad way of looking at everything right now. And so watching the news, you only need about 3.5 minutes to figure out that we're in a state of, downward spiral. And there's only so long before the human body is going to allow that to happen. We're not wired for that much fear. So I said, well, why don't I think I'll live till 95? Is that a story about my own body? Yes, in part. Neither of my parents lived past their 85th birthday. So Stephen's mom lived to 95. So maybe he'll make it that long. But it was more than that. There's this this low grade awareness. And then what came through was all these other people I have deep touch points also have a low grade awareness of how much darker it has to get before we find the animus, we find our big picture, going all in for love. No more hesitation of trust, just to trust that even the suffering is in service to bringing us home. Perspective, only when we reach that level of trusting the moment do we step into that new quantum space, that new quantum reality of higher states of consciousness. And so it's the difference between consenting to the human experience, if you look over on the right end of this slide, and resisting the human experience. We have been resisting the human experience since the very beginning because it includes death and dying and all of the experiences that surround that, from illness and loss and poverty. And so we're clinging so much to the avoidance of the human experience that we're in such a fear-based, prostrate, don't hurt me kind of surrender to the human experience. But where we're really needing to move is not surrendering to it, not resisting it, but consenting to it. And so this map speaks to how we do that. And the thing about this map is, and I highly recommend you read the book, but this logarithmic expansion, he says, they did a process with thousands of participants, and they began to think of sort of 0 to 1,000 being the scale of consciousness. And they took that as the golden rule of awareness. And then they began to take words and muscle test people in the use of those words. And, does it calibrate at 50? Does it calibrate at 40? Does it calibrate at 30? Okay, yes, that's where we've got the strength. It's, guilt is calibrating at 30. Anxiety, where does anxiety? Does it calibrate at 50? Nope. 75? Nope. Okay, strong at 100. All right, anxiety's at 100. So they had thousands of people go through this. And you can imagine, they had to make sure each person was cleared and grounded, and you had permission to work with them. There's a whole process, and there's a ton of stuff up on YouTube of him demonstrating this kinesiological, and the word, it's a big word, but just visceral, physical alignment with truth. We can discern inside of us through muscle testing, and even more so once you've gotten comfortable with what truth feels like in your own body. You don't need to muscle test and have somebody validate from the outside. You can just feel it. You just know that a word like shame resonates very differently in the body than a word like love. Right? We just know. So intrinsically, we know this. This is that deep pineal gland access to our higher state of consciousness that never leaves us. There are just some core truths that survive the amnesia as a way of bringing us back home to ourselves. So this logarithmic expansion, he says, each time you go from 20 to 30, you're not going from 20 to 30, but you're going 20 to the power of 10 gets you to 30. 30 to the power of 10 gets you to 50. 50 to the power of 10 gets you to 100. Or 75. So it's kind of like the Richter scale, right? For earthquakes. You don't go from a 5.0 earthquake to 6.0 and experience just incrementally that much more. It's a factor of 10 Richter scale, right? So a 6.0 earthquake isn't just slightly less than a 7-point earthquake. It is exponentially lower than a 7.0 earthquake. So like buildings collapse at 7.0, they didn't collapse at 6.0, and it's just not that much more. It's that much more. So as you look at this scale moving up to 1,000, you can imagine, and he talks a lot about these enlightened beings to resonate at 1,000. Think of how much they had to move up this scale of awareness to reach that point where there is no judgment, there is no story, there's just what is in the moment, and this discernment, this inner knowing. And so this scale began to really just work me and work me and work me. And he talks about this in his book, but what I noticed a while back was the higher states of consciousness are far more complex. You have to take in all of the different inputs to the story, our history, our current environment, the people involved, the underlying construct of fear, the current event, and the conflagration of chaos around us. All of those elements begin to have a pixelated reality in your intake. You just see it all through that bigger lens. It isn't you're wrong and she's right. No, you are acting in accordance with how you arrived in this set and setting, and how you are reacting to, and there's your word, Kent, reacting to everything around you, versus just being present to it and seeing it for what it is. It's an expansion of love. Even the hard stuff is an expansion of love. So this logarithmic expansion, he says, most people, if you can get to the point of courage, isn't that interesting that even courage doesn't make it above the red line? I would have thought courage is like, whew, but that's where you're beginning to trust your heart, courage, right? The heart. And that courage takes you to neutrality. Wouldn't you think almost that neutrality would have to come before courage? Can't I see you sitting up? How does that land in your belly? The courage is actually still, in the sort of the resistance to the human story versus the consent to it side of things versus neutrality. How does that unpack for you?
Well, I'm with you. It seems like it should be reversed. But courage, it takes courage to step up and face the fear, where neutrality is just kind of being neutral and more passive, I guess.
Okay. So let's look at the words that go with courage, because this, I think, sort of the word empowerment is the one that jumps out for me, that courage is a moment of taking our power back. Does that make sense? And when we take our power back, we're then in a position to move into that neutrality. When we're still operating from fear, a construct, a mindset of fear, the idea of empowering ourselves to move out of fear is a step towards neutrality. You can't even get to neutrality if you're still operating from a construct of fear. Does that make sense? Yeah. So now once I began to unpack it through that lens, I was like, oh, all right. So these build on each other. Like there's this, the minute you cross over that red line, you start to move into a place where you are experiencing that logarithmic expansion in your perception. So it takes courage to hold the view that what you know is true in your body, that we're beings of love and light, is something that you can trust absolutely, that you can fall in love with trusting that we are source coded in love. And from that place, you're able to move up the rest of the scale, if you will. Now, he talks a lot in his things on YouTube about how even this model got patriarchal bastardized, because then it was like, oh, well, elites versus not, right? Like people who operated from the place of fear began to see people who didn't operate from a place of fear as a threat. And can you relate to this at all? What's happening in our political sphere right now, the insanity that is our story of the United States right now? Like, we got people who are saying we want to give mothers and children a fair shake in this human construct. We want to allocate what was going to a military budget, a force budget, and put it into an empowerment budget of helping raise the dignity of life across our country. And we got people resisting that notion. So and I think this is what people feel right now, that there's an insanity to this whole thing, that this nihilistic path of mutual destruction, suicide pact that we have come to accept as our reality, as our construct, because we're living our entire construct is based in these words below the red line, in that logarithmic contraction. So being at 20 is not 180 points away from courage. It is 20 to the power of 10, 30 to the power of 10. I'm not good at the math, but it's a major. So even just moving 4 or 5 points in your lifetime is a big shift. And he said the average human will only elevate maybe 4 or 5 points on this consciousness scale in their entire lifetime. So I was like, oh, dang. So this really is a process over time. There's no switch to flip here, Kat. It's what are you laughing at, Karen? What grabbed you in that?
Oh, dang. That's what grabbed me.
Say more. What's in that dang? What's in that package?
Yes, it's the minuscule when you're working at being more of the above the red line, and you can feel the shedding of some of those descriptions or adjectives or verbs, and you feel you're shedding some of those, and you can feel that lightning and the oh dang, only that many points.
So here's the colonization of our mind, right? We think we have to achieve a target condition.
Point. Yeah.
Right? Like we're failing somehow. I mean, that all right, let's get back below the red line again, right? We're still in the sort of enslavement to an old idea, all the way down at the level of craving and desire. Like anytime we think we're not enough, we are reinforcing this mistrust of ourselves. Mistrust that you are uniquely light filled to show up in this world at this time exactly as you are. And the magic of this moment is recognizing that you get to make it feel as good for you as you want. Like, you don't have to live in that reality. This below the red line, this forced mindset, this oh my God, I only got 4 points out of this lifetime. Shit, this was hardly worth the effort. But remember, I thought I signed up for 5 points or 10 points. Certainly I'm going to reach 600. Where am I? Well, I try and feel love, but it's a fleeting thing. I get pulled back. I had some contraction this last week. I have contractions around what I perceive as happening at the fear-based construct level. Like, we live in a 3D world, but we're being invited, and that's where power always wins over force, is we're being invited to exercise choice. You have to choose love over fear. And if I go back to my Mormon theology days and other Christian texts, they'll talk about the Satan Christ battle for heaven, and that Heavenly Father gave his 2 sons this task of divining, truly the word is used best there, divining the human experience. Like, if we want all of this light to come into physical form, to learn love, what's the toolkit we send them with? Do we let them know the knowledge of good and evil? Oh, hello, Adam and Eve. Or do we, I just read something today, there's a beautiful corollary between Pandora's box, unleashing truth, versus Adam and Eve's fall from grace and the knowledge of good and evil. We've got this baked into our story a dozen different ways since the beginning of time. We recognize that there has been some separation from truth, some amnesia about who we are. And as we begin to wake up from that amnesia, we're gonna be sloppy with some of these, below the red line experiences, but we can choose our free will. That's the one thing that Christ said, no, we're going to give them free will. We're not going to force people to comply with love. We're going to give them the golden rule, and that's enough. That's what Christ's plan was, this golden rule. If you do unto others that which you want done to you, you will live a life of love. We didn't need any other stories to go with it, but we are storytellers to our core. And some of these stories have been in service to reinforcing control on the human construct. And so where we're moving to is this sense of power, not power in the capitalistic defined, I only got 4 points of enlightenment this go round mindset, this pure awareness, as Ram Dass calls it, loving awareness of who we are. And so we move up from life is okay to it's inspiring. Every day, I think I spent a lot of my life aspiring to that 300 willingness, optimistic, trying to show up with intention. And as I butt up against that and also slide back down into shame and guilt, and I've got my story that I'm still processing through, all that to say, I don't think you just keep moving up the ladder. I think there's 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. You get triggered, you go into deep places, but you step out of them faster. You don't loop through the old story as often. You get back into the present moment. And when we stay in the present moment, what's happened in the past becomes less and less important to us. And so these words, are ways of sort of taking your own temperature of where am I today? What would I like to feel today? Well, I'd like to feel inspired. I'd like to feel loving. I'd like to feel benign and see life as benign so that I'm not triggered by everything. I don't take it personal. It just is what it is. It's the motion of the ocean, not the crash of the wave that I'm tending. And when I can get there, and every once in a while I do feel a day like that, there's a deep reverence that comes with that knowing. And Kent, I know in the last week you've had a sense of that reverence.
Mm-hmm. It's been a nice week, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, talk about the lens of love. I've been wearing sunglasses, the dark lenses, for quite a while.
Yeah.
And to look at things a different way. This week's been wonderful.
Can you share? Is it okay to share?
It's your call,
Is it okay to share?
I knew Kent was going to be here, and I allocated space for that to happen. So you share what you feel comfortable sharing.
Well, the big thing that clicked for me was not feeding the lies, not feeding the fear. If you give attention to the lies and the fear, it just feeds it. It poke and prod it. It just continues to be there and be this thing that haunts you. But if you look through, take off the lens of darkness and put on the lens of love, and not look back at that darkness, not look at the lies, but just if you just don't pay attention to it, it can't grow. It can only get smaller or not be seen. So that's kind of where I am right now. It's worked the whole week, and like the very first day I saw something that has been a has been a something I've been fighting with for quite a while, and I just looked at it in a different way. I didn't let it trigger me. I didn't let it get me there, and I just knew that I didn't have control over it. So why make it an issue of mine? I know the truth about it, and that's all I can do is just know that I know the truth. It's my truth, and other people have a different truth, but I can just live in my truth and not let that darkness get any of my attention, if that makes any sense.
A week ago, Kent and I gathered and we had a healing conversation. And what came through for Kent, and also maybe this will apply to others who will hear this, is the difference between the words and the construct associated with them between magnifying glass and compass. And Kent had been looking at the world with a magnifying glass like a scientist looking for what's wrong. Mm-hmm. And he found all the places where we have not lived up to our human construct of loving each other. He found all the ways where people have forced. I mean, he's as tapped into the underbelly, the shadow, the some would call it a cabal. Others assigned a bigger story to what's happening right now of evil, controlling things, this authoritarian movement, all of that. Kent is somebody who is such a good researcher and a detail-oriented person. He never was exhausted with why. He kept going deeper and deeper into the why of things. Why are we doing this? Not just what are we doing, but why are we doing this? And what we were able to do was move from that magnifying glass of pursuit to more of a compass, to take what he has spent his life accumulating and understanding. He's got a beautiful mechanical brain. He's a MacGyver. He's an inventor. He's somebody who looks at a problem and sees a solution. A manifester. He's patented products. He's done really cool things with that brilliant mind of his. And for years, that brilliant mind of his has been in the dark dungeon of our story. And by giving him a compass instead of a magnifying glass, where he now stands is exactly where he is in this moment, but he knows what true north looks like. He knows what love looks like, and he's here to solve for X. He's somebody who knows how to come into a broken scenario and bring it into harmony, bring it into a more loving. I'm looking at all these words, transcendence of the old story into the new. So he's a bridge builder, but he's been, on the side of the river where everything is crumbling. And I said, can we put all that brilliance to the side of the river where we're going, to move with all that wisdom over this tipping point of trust that you don't have to live in the whodunits anymore, but how do we do it? Is where your brilliance will shine the greatest. And so that lens of perception shift aided with the words and metaphors. If you look at the Bible, so much of what the Bible is it's stories, it's metaphors, it's parables. We need to really recognize the story, the parable of our lives, and where we get to take all of our accumulated experiences, including the wounding, and use that to show up in consent to what is, so that we can begin to apply all of our gifts and talents to solving for X. Like it's just a shift. But it is a piece of the story that we really struggle with, trusting. And so what I love about Dr. Hawkins' work is he's now said, your soul has a lever, a tool set that you can access in your own body. And by using applied kinesiology and muscle testing, he's able to work with people about, everything from business to commerce to medicine. Where's the next right step on the path of consciousness for every layer of the matrix that we exist in now in a 3D universe? We are muscle testing away from truth. Like what started me on my human path has been this quest for how do we align in truth? How do we begin to come together in truth? And I think everything around the virus and vaccines and politics and everything has just created a perfect petri dish of chaos to begin to ask different questions about truth, to move out of that need to force our ideas on each other, our truth on each other, but to stand back and see, where is their truth and where is their fear? And that's where we get to show up in a different place. And so this, I don't know if I'll be able to play this. I'm a little nervous because of the technology. So maybe what I'll do is post it after. It's about a 6-minute video. It's Dr. Hawkins actually showing the applied kinesiology with his map of consciousness up on the wall. And I'm not going to mess with the technology. I'm getting a big gut no because something's not right in my system tonight. But I'll put it in the the events page around this presentation so that you can go listen to yourself. This is a direct quote out of the book Power versus Force, and it comes back to question number 1 of the healing conversation, which is, are you ready, willing, and able to have the healing conversation? And below consciousness level 200, comprehension is limited by the dominance of the lower mind, which is capable of recognizing facts but not yet able to grasp what is meant by the term truth. Are you getting this as hard as I got this when I read this? People who are operating from a force mindset, the lower mind, which is a fear-based construct, are not even able to grasp what truth is. So this week I had an interaction with somebody on Facebook, which is always my petri dish of exploration, about how do we define truth. And there was no willingness to even unpack the nature of truth with me. No curiosity about the idea of why we both have different truths. How does one have a healing conversation to align with truth, which is the manifestation of love in a physical world? How does one even have that conversation if we cannot come to terms about truth, what it is? How do we define it? How do we get to it? And so Dr. Hawkins uses the term re interna versus re externa. Truth, does it come from outside of us or does it come from inside of us, that external versus internal? And he says that truth has physiological accompaniments which are different from those of falsehood. In other words, there is a resonance in our body that we are being invited to choose to follow that resonance in our body over the resonance of fear outside of us. Because remember, our bodies in that pure state of consciousness are pure love. And so it's a choice. That's where Jesus's plan was accepted by Heavenly Father, and Satan's plan of force, choice versus force, was rejected, and he was cast out. And then he set about to create a world based in force. So if you follow Christian ideology, they're kind of living up to their mantra about Satan and the model of force, forcing others to live by their construct about how a woman's body shouldn't have its own rights, their construct about everybody should have to take care of themselves without putting a social safety net in place. Everything that we're experiencing in our divisiveness, not just in the United States, but across the world. But this is we are in a moment, a tipping point of trusting love over fear that cannot even be met in a middle ground with people who are in that re externa mindset. So this is big work. So we have to do it one point on the enlightenment scale at a time. Just each time we hear a word, now I'll hear a word and all of a sudden it'll grab me. And this meme that this woman posted basically said, I'm glad to say my DNA will be intact through 2021. Now, if Lee was here, she'd say, yeah, that's why I took the vaccine, because I knew that my DNA would be intact. That this was mRNA, it wasn't DNA. And the other side of the spectrum is saying, no, the thing messes with your DNA. And so I my belly just lit up. I was like, oh, this is an absolute example of why we are going through such an interesting mind fuck right now. We are associating our certainty with a righteousness of truth, rather than trusting that Kent's version, Edie's version, Karen's version, each of us is coming to truth in our own way. And so this messiness shows up in words. And so these are all listed, and it's a much more expansive list than what I'm sharing with you. It's 2 full pages of word sandwiches. And in between those sandwiches are these ideas, these pattern interrupts that cause us to really think about the language and how we're using it. So abundant versus excessive. On the left side, it resonates above 200. On the right side of that 2 columns, it resonates below 200. So just let's unpack these 2 words, abundant versus excessive. Why would one resonate higher? What does abundant mean versus excessive? What's the grist in that mill? How do you define the word abundant? How do you define the word excessive? And why would one resonate higher and the other resonate lower?
Do you want us to do this internally?
No, that's just jump in. It's
okay. For abundant, to me, means there's plenty for everyone.
Right.
We have what we need. There's plenty for everyone. And excessive means, to me, that you have more than what you need, and to have for everybody else. You have more than somebody else. You have an excessive amount instead of the
Right.
abundance for everyone idea.
You could have words sub to that, like gluttony, hoarding,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That fits right in. Yeah.
Right. And abundant with words like enough and satisfied, complete, whole. You can see how these words sort of arc out into trees of constellations of thought, constellations of awareness. So let's take another one: resilience versus certainty. Kent, do you want to take that one on?
No.
Okay. All right. How about you look at the list and pick one that jumps out at you?
Well, of course, easing and F14,
Mm-hmm.
right side, about 6 down.
Yeah, right here.
I've been struggling to get into the E's, as you know. Everything seems to be an effort to educate myself, educate others, find the truth, as you talked about, rather than easing. I mean, I just struggle with that. But I'm trying to see what the difference is. Efforting, it sounds like you're struggling, you're trying all you can do, whereas easing, you're just kind of letting yourself find your way.
I would even take it into more physicality in your definition. So ease, just say that word and let that word resonate in your body. What happens to your body when you say the word ease, when you think the word ease? You notice where you're not at ease, right? You notice where there's tension in your body. You might even move your body a little differently. You might sort of ground into your hips differently, or your back. Can you do that with me? Get your body at ease.
For me, when I say ease, it comes with an exhale. It's ease. Whereas efforting is like, it's more of an inhale and
love it.
Taking stuff
love
in.
it.
So ease
yes.
is kind of a release
of control.
Yeah. So that's interesting to look at the physicality of the word, what it does to you. But yeah.
Ask your body, ask your hands right now to show you what ease looks like in one hand and efforting looks like in the other hand.
Yeah. So yeah.
Right.
Ease are a little relaxed and limp, where efforting, it's more of a clenched fist and
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So see how language informs a visceral knowing in our bodies.
Interesting. Yeah.
Right. So you become really sensitive to this striving versus struggling. Striving means you're moving into your power, right? There's an expansion versus struggling. It's more of a contraction, right? So I've given you some prompts here. Some of these are very paradoxical. And some of them are much more subtle. You have to go, is that word inclusive or exclusive? Is it promoting love or fear, power or force, division or connection? And so when I witness politicians, when I witness policies, when I witness movements, I'm feeling into, does what they're saying and doing bring more love and connection, or does it create more separation and fear? And that is my compass. That is my true north. That is my inner guidance system being more alive to me than all of the external inputs of my story. And I think that's because, as I said early in this session tonight, and you know me, I'm in the flow. I never know why some of the things come through when they do. And I'm connecting the dots. When I shared with you that I don't follow a lot of gurus, I don't read so much to learn, but to affirm that something early in my childhood set me on a path of trusting my inner wisdom to bring me home. And words have been my tool in that navigation. So, there's a couple of others in here that I think are really relevant right now. Individualism versus individuation. Now, most of this is Dr. Hawkins' work, but I also threw in that one, which is mine, that I've been dancing with for a long time, that this rugged individualism, this Western mindset. Stephen loves to watch Cheyenne and all of the old Western shows. And I sit there and we laugh because it's so ripe with misogyny and patriarchal bullshit. It's like, sit down, girl, you don't have no voice here. And I just look at her and go, okay, she's going to get slapped next, right? That's what's coming. Like we're, and she's going to get, thrown over and taken advantage of, and everybody's going to be okay with that. Okay, I can watch this with you. I mean, there's a bit of humor in it, but you could, when people say we're not getting better, we are getting better. We're getting more sensitive to the ways that we have treated each other in the past. But if your identity is tied up in that way of beingness and you don't have courage, going back to the previous table, courage to have an individual thought, you can take that rugged individualism and translate that into a very fear-based construct, like every man for himself. Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. There are winners and losers. There's, good and bad. You can just go to that polarizing mindset so quickly and not see the nuance, not see the complexity of the human story as it shows up in this moment, that we are all just a product, an output of a process that's brought us to this point. And if you look at the inputs to that process, all the complexity of that process, you gain this lens of love, appreciation for the majesty of this moment, to reach that place of acceptance, even when it brings me to a place of grief. That's part of the story too, that we are going to feel all of that grief. And ultimately what that grief is going to come down to is that we forced this upon ourselves, that we took free will and weaponized it against each other, instead of using our free will to create harmonious, noble, tolerant, considerate, constructive, all these words that resonate above 200, to choose them over the ones that resonate below 200. That we really truly have, as you said, Kent, I had a really good week. and there are times when we have these sort of medicine level breakthroughs where we become our own medicine, that you can see a before and after. You can resonate with where you were coming from before and what is different. And it is merely a lens of perception shift. Nothing in the world around you changed. You chose something different for yourself, right? And it doesn't mean that those awful things didn't happen, aren't still happening, that there are really bad people out there, but you don't have to suffer in their unconsciousness. So that's why language matters. We have to language ourselves into this newer, higher state of consciousness. So, there's a couple more pairs here. Serene and dull. I want you to feel what serene feels like in your body. Think of a time when you've been in a very serene state of being. What did that feel like in your body? Dive in. Words, just throw a couple words. What does it feel like in your body when you're in a state of serenity?
Light.
Release.
Release.
Oh, like, yes. Yeah.
Light. And what do you
Satisfied.
Satisfied.
Yeah,
Whole.
that's not quite right. Yes, I like that.
Complete.
At peace. At peace, yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there's you can feel your central nervous system have a different experience in that awareness of serenity, right? You can line up your body and your spirit and your mind, body, spirit, in that awareness, that your body understands what spirit knows, and your mind finally accepts that. And so you have this inner guidance system awareness of what serenity feels like. And when you see serenity manifested in the world, so again, like we broke out abundant and excessive represented as gluttony, as hoarding, as overreach, overconsumption, materialism, capitalism, unchecked. I mean, you could just begin to expand that word excessive into every representative architectural awareness of our construct. And the word abundant has an equal manifestation. Nobody's hungry. Everybody's got access to education and well-being. And you can just feel that feels better in your body than a world that operates under the word excessive. So can you feel the alignment that I'm trying to bring to awareness in this conversation tonight, is how resonant truth is in our bodies. And especially when we explore these words like selfful, selfish. When I first began to reach that tipping point of trust that love was enough, that life was happening for me, not to me, falling in love with trust that I am enough. I am an abundant human, just as I am, right? All of a sudden, there's this sense in your body that's different than when you were operating from not enoughness, from that place where you're not full. You're having to chase things outside of yourself to fill you up. Fill you up. I'm going to keep it that way. I think that's a sweet way to think about that. Because maybe fill you up is a different kind of gluttony. What if we fill ourselves up, right? What if we become so present to our self-fullness that it's our default mode network? Versus selfish. What does the word selfish expand into?
Centered on self, focused totally on self, and not in humanity.
Okay. Yeah, even more than that, I think.
Like a shell. Yeah, there's a shell. You're just here, and everything outside of that shell, doesn't matter.
Right. And you said some things earlier about non-judgment, and you made a powerful connector, and I want to highlight it here, between when you stop judging others, you also stop judging yourself. Self-fullness means non-judgment. You are enough, right? And when you reach that in yourself, you also can feel it for other people. There's a fullness for others outside of you, because you're full. You don't have to take anything from anybody else, right? When you are sourcing from within, you don't have to go outside of yourself to get it. When I look at the word selfish, the word fish jumps out of here. Like you have to go keep throwing your ego out into the ocean to try and get what you need. And it's never enough, because you can never get what you need to be whole from outside of you. You can only get what you need to be whole inside of you. And so when you have to go fishing for it, then it becomes transactional, and you do for others, but you expect them to do, and this power and control thing, that's how that whole dynamic plays out. If you take that word selfish, it looks like hoarding. Again, it looks like scarcity. It looks like a lack of empathy. It looks like a disconnection from the world around us. So isn't it interesting that we go within ourselves as self-full, we are instantly connected to the world around us, but when we go to a place of selfish, we are disconnected from the world around us. So this goes back to the idea that being self-full cannot possibly be selfish, because when you are self-full, you only can express that in your own body when you also want that for everyone around you, right? It's where you meet yourself in the oneness, the awareness that we want everybody to feel this level of love. We want everybody to feel this place of wholeness. So these words, we could do a workshop on wholeness and sovereignty. That's another one that I inserted in there, because the concept of sovereignty is a very sort of regal history, kingdom constructed idea of sovereign. You are a sovereign, you have all the power, right? Well, in this case, we're using body sovereignty as both a part of self-fullness, but also selfishness. It's a word that has some really interesting nuance to it. And so the only way I could play with it was to say, well, what is the step up from sovereignty? And to me, it's wholeness. It's that abundance versus fighting back against somebody who wants to take something away from you. That concept of sovereignty has been steeped in fear for so long that you have to claim your sovereignty from the world outside of you versus you are whole. And so these words deserve a workshop in and of themselves. And so I guess that's where my brain goes all the time. And it often manifests, as it did with Kent, as a lesson in perspective, the magnifying glass versus the compass, self-full versus selfish, abundant versus excessive. Like if there's a scripture that talks about, you cannot, and how can you see the sins of others when you have a mote in your own eye? Like, when Jesus said, let he who hath no sin cast the first stone, this is the magnifying glass. We're looking at each other's faults all the time, but that is a fear-based, force-based orientation to the human story. Where I want to move us is this compass. This true north is source code of love. We're here to solve for X, and to tune our bodies as a compass to know which is the right next step, the right next action or inaction as we are prompted to listen to. So it's a big body of work. And I want to invite, maybe as I think about going forward with this healing conversation, maybe a book club to have us read a book together and really dissect it, because I'm not doing this book near the justice it deserves, because he's done a beautiful job, and it was written over a decade ago, unpacking exactly what's happening right now in the United States, that we have baked into our DNA core principles of love. But we also existed with the setting of a core existence of fear. And so these two dynamics are playing out in a very adolescent way on a world stage for everyone to, I read things this week that made me aware more than ever that there are people that want to control us so much that they are willing to do things that just seem unbelievable to me. So Kent, I went through the magnifying glass rabbit hole this week. And it took me down some really dark places. And I thought, okay, that I can either exist in that dark place with them, or I can cross that red line, that Rubicon of self-love, and note that I just have to hold a different construct for me to want to be here. I have to hold a different portal of reality in my mind as a threshold that we're pushing ourselves through with this unconsciousness. So Tara Brock, I love this. She says, imagine you're walking in the woods and you see a small dog sitting by a tree. As you approach it, it suddenly lunges at you. Teeth bared, you are frightened and angry. But then you notice that one of its legs is caught in a trap, and immediately your mood shifts from anger to concern. Paradigm shift. You went from below the red line to above the red line. You go from fear to compassion. Can you feel that shift? Immediately your mood shifts from anger to concern. You see that the dog's aggression is coming from a place of vulnerability and pain. This applies to all of us. And I would just say this applies to the collective, the entire human story. We are a walking wounded population, carrying thousands of years of resonance in the lower mind, being invited to step into a higher mind. When we behave in hurtful ways, it is because we are caught in some kind of trap. The more we look through the eyes of wisdom at ourselves and one another, the more we cultivate a compassionate heart. So this is where that free will, that choice, the plan, and some would call it God's plan. That's not my words, but I'll accept that that's the lens of perception that others, I think it's just obvious. I think the path to a divine heaven on earth is so not outside there. It's all potentialed in us, not in God coming to save us, but in us redeeming ourselves from our unconsciousness. So question number one is, do we love are we ready, willing, and able? Clearly, people operating from the force construct are struggling with that ability to step over that red line of trust. We must be willing. Number two is, what would we have to believe about each other to live in harmony? And I just defined it, that some people just are not able to get there yet. But that does not have to, as you can't create my reaction to what is happening, it offers up an opportunity to consciously respond to what's happening around me. So maybe that's a combination of words, reaction versus conscious response, right? To show up just a heartbeat slower in the moment of what's happening and ask a different question, right? So question number three is, where's our bias? Are we willing to fact check our fears? And maybe are we willing to explore a different context for the human experience? Are we willing to even have a conversation about how would we get to trust? What would be the universal yes that we would all agree to? And I can promise you, it will not be some arbiter of truth outside of us. It will only be the arbiter of truth that is built into us. It's only through this elevated state of consciousness that we can find not middle ground with each other, but higher ground. And what we come to is this recognition that everything that's happened up until this moment is not our fault. This dog is growling at us not because it wants to, but because it is in pain. It is suffering. So it's not our fault, but it is our collective fault line. And this is what we're going to come to. And when I feel the darkness all around me right now, it's that the earth is quaking. Our construct is shaking. We're going to see things. If you 3 years ago looking to now, think of what we've witnessed that are unique events in our lifetime. We're going to see so many unique pattern interrupting, construct interrupting, paradigm shifting opportunities. That is our fault line. And I just feel all of that. So then I have to jump to question number 5 is, what is my role in the healing conversation? How do I show up in my life in a way that brings more ease and less efforting to me, more presence to what love looks like in a self-full version of Edie versus what love looks like in we should put pleaser up there. Where does pleaser fit? In a force reality or in a power reality? Let's create one. What's the other side of pleaser? Let's define pleaser. What does pleaser do? They go along to get along. They're boundaryless because, fear is an untended boundary. They've allowed other people's codependency to become their reality. Like most people don't stay in alignment with themselves because they're afraid of how it's going to land with others. So they become pleasers. They chase, right? They do everything they can. They overachieve. They become, this was my coping strategy, was to become a pleaser, was to be beyond reproach, to be the very best at something, to go beyond 4 points. Thank you very much, Karen. Right? That's a trauma response, right? Pleasers are in a trauma response to their environment. So what would an untraumatized response look like?
I want to pick words that won't match the way these are, but I would say secure, but see, I'm not picking the
Okay.
right word that goes with the pleaser. Independent, but that sounds too much like the sovereignty thing.
Right.
So that word doesn't quite work. And
Here's a word that comes to me as I sit with it. Measured. And this is boundaried. Measured between my selffulness and your wellness. Measured between being compassionate in the moment and living out a pattern of giving up on myself. So when I think of pleaser, I think of somebody who's chasing love from outside of themselves, whereas I think of the opposite of that, or the balance to that, is somebody who sources from within. It's an interesting exercise, isn't it? To take our words and really
self-knowing, that's another thing that, anyway.
I love
but
that.
I like the measured too, but self-knowing, actualized, I don't know, so those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's all of those things. And so when we begin to dream into that healed state of the human condition, we're going to go through every word in our human construct and run it against the litmus test of, does this word bring more unity, more connection, more trust? Is this word a conduit of trust? Is this meme? Is this story? Is this speaker? Is this politician? Is this policy? Are these conduits of trust with each other again? And if they are not, then we know that they are conduits of mistrust. Hawkins, I'll just kind of wrap up on this idea. He says, we think of light and dark as being forces. He says, and I have often said this as well, so his words are again an affirmation for me, that light is, darkness is when we are without light. It is not a force in and of itself. It is a spectrum of light from 1,000 down to 1, total darkness. And maybe there are some people that reach that place of total darkness, and there are on that bell curve those that meet that total lightness. I have to believe that that is true, because the world is one of sacred geometry and balance and symmetry. So we exist on a spectrum in this human condition. And where we're going to this trust is toward the light, no matter what. We don't have to dance in the dark anymore. We don't have to get caught up in the drama of that darkness, how it came to be and how it is in this moment. We can stay in that, as Martin Prechtel talks about in his book, The Toe Bone and the Tooth, after telling his life story and the grief and shadow that he had to walk through that was projected onto him as a carrier of medicine, as a speaker for the indigenous beauty of Guatemala, and all the things the United States did in the name of colonialism, and how it robbed him of a life of ease. And yet he found his ease in these words: you keep your head down and you keep moving toward the light. You keep moving toward the love, and what's left behind is the shadow. So it is that incremental awareness to choose to feel the choice of love over fear. And self-fullness brings more fullness of love to everyone around us, because we're not sourcing from outside of ourselves. We're not chasing, pleasing others. We are staying in our boundaried state of self-awareness that we source from within, not outside of ourselves. And from that place, we begin to have what he builds out as what he calls an attractor field around us. And that attractor field, it isn't that some live in light, some live in dark. It's that they have an energy frequency that attracts more of that frequency. And the same is true of light. We end up surrounded by the frequency that we're operating from. So as we move into this, I love words, dementia versus realm-mentia. Dementia, the word mentia means a state of mind, the condition of the mind. When we think of the word dementia, we think about the diminishment of that cognitive state of the mind. But if we use mentia in its purest sense, it's just a state of mind. And I think when we start to be abundant and trust and move up that word ladder to higher states of consciousness, acting it out in our lives, we enter what I call realm-mentia, where that's the lens of love. You see the whole realm of it. You see the matrix and all of the layers and how all of the parts are moving, but they're moving us into this place where we can no longer live out of alignment. And those words are very specific. We will not survive out of alignment. So we are going through this in service to bringing us into our alignment. May it be so, may it be love. Aho. So I'd love some back channel. Tell me where that landed for you tonight. What's your
You want us
takeaway?
to give you some feedback?
Yeah,
You want us to give you some feedback?
I'd like to know where there was a shift of consciousness in your awareness.
Okay. I suppose for me, I talked about the feeling, the needing to lighten up with the heavy, those heavy words, and so feeling those those words mean in my body was the piece that made the most sense to me, and the piece that for me, that and when we deal just with the human condition, it's probably because of all the stuff I'm reading right now. I told you about that one
Right.
book. I listened to a Zoom call with Dr. Zach Bush. I think you've heard us talk about him
Yes.
before.
Yeah.
You know him, Kent? Who are you familiar with him?
Yes.
He's a genius MD, you know, with many accolades. And he's this most wonderful human being. And so we're talking about regeneration in that seminar, and it's sort of like regenerating our soul with this chart. And he was addressing the puberty and fertility rates with the way our planet is. And so I'm thinking that for me, being more in touch with the earth, and another comment he made about our sense of superiority as life on the planet, that we think we're superior. He didn't say it like that. That's my languaging. To all life on the planet, but we're an integral part of it all. And so this, for me, kind of weaves into all of that, all the life force on the planet, and particularly with the legitimate concerns about climate change. But it's through love and this respect that this is forcing us to do what you're saying, to come from a different place.
That's right.
This climate change is forcing us to look at life differently, and be with each other differently, and be with ourselves differently.
She's courting us into wholeness with her. And sometimes from our lens of fear, the courtship is rough. But with the lens of love, even suffering has, like birthing pains, labor pains, has an outcome of joy. Like, you know, like this, to see it through the lens of fear is just watch what's happening with the climate and want to go into complete denial about it, because there is just that recognition that we brought this on ourselves. That meeting our shadow face to face is going to be a really hard thing to reckon, right? It's a death. It's an ego death to the old story, and we have to die before we can live. You know, that was the Alan Watts wisdom passed on. And so this, when you see it through that lens, then you start to orient toward, well, where are the healing solutions? It's in community, it's in soil regeneration, it's all the things that, you know, we've talked about. Kent's got the same vision on his land. He's in a regeneration of food and well-being in his space. And so, yeah, this, and the language we use, the frequency, is something that we can be much more conscious to. Yeah. And when all of these, like, you can feel Zach Bush, he's in the realm.
Oh, can you ever feel
yeah
that?
Right. He's in the realm. You know, this realm-mentia is not a bad thing. This is a lens, a conditioned way of seeing it all, and he sees a piece of it. And you know the people you resonate with, they see a piece of it. We're all, you have a piece of it, I have a piece of it. We all, each of us is here to show up in our fullest expression. That's our piece of the puzzle that we're here to bring. So if we're hanging out at that red line, not trusting that we're enough, we are never going to be able to bring it all. If you're hanging out with a magnifying glass looking for who to blame, who to shame, and how to use that to gain yourself into more force, we won't get there. And
we're harbingers of change.
Yes. Kent, how about for you? What grabbed your consciousness tonight?
Well, we talk about the lens of love, and combining the microscope and the compass, and that story that you shared about the bear raging and coming across it and then noticing that it was in a trap. So for me, as far as the lenses go, the frame is kind of the why. And you can either look at the why through the dark lens and see the negatives, or you could look through the lens of
Different
love.
lenses give you different perspectives.
I mean, when you look at that why was the bear being that way? It was because it was, so, but a lot of people don't go that far. They just see the fear and stop there and not step back and observe and see what the why is.
Right.
And I think that also goes to other people's truth. We're talking about truth. I have my own truth. Everybody has their own truth, but why is that their truth? And you got to respect why. Maybe because they were raped, or maybe they lost their parents when they were 2 years old, or you don't know that why. But when you find out that why, you're gonna look at that person in a whole different lens than you would if you didn't go to
So
that spot.
this is where the download. Thank you for bringing it fully into realization tonight, Kent. Truth will become lies, will become truth. It's in service to helping us realign with our inner guidance system. And the add-on, the not disconnected from, but equally true, it will be you telling your story and us meeting each other in our stories of how we got here. To hold the human story through the lens of love is a mythical tale. It's really a hero's journey that we've gone from complete amnesia, but these inner source codes that would bring us home to the awareness of those source codes, to now living in alignment with those source codes. That is a hero's journey. That's a magnificent story we get to tell ourselves in this moment, because we get to tell ourselves any story we want. Pick a word on that spectrum. Have a story of guilt and shame and fear and sorrow and loss and hatred and separation, or you can pick a story from the words up above, which is joy and alignment and kindness and enoughness and abundance and reboot. We can do this. We can reboot the human operating system. We can choose the story we want to tell ourselves. We've been living in a story we didn't realize we had the power to change. So Zach is telling a part of the story, and Charles Eisenstein is telling a part of the story, and each of us has a piece of the puzzle. I have this sense that we're describing the elephant in the room with a blindfold on, but it's not an elephant. We don't yet know what this manifested consciousness of love completely looks like, but I can promise you it is a quantum leap from where we are. We don't even understand the potentiality of technologies that will take plastic and turn it into the most tremendously valuable resource on this planet. We have not, all the mistakes of our past have the potentiality to become our resources of the future. That's exactly what the human story is. All the mistakes of our past become the springboard of new lens of perception for the future. Our mistakes become our gifts. Our wounds become our medicine. We are exactly what we've done to the earth. Bringing our past into consciousness creates a potentiality we don't yet even comprehend. So if you think about the lower mind, and if there's a higher mind, there's an exponential leap in that elevation of acceptance, that whatever happens, you doing you, going all in, incrementally choosing love over fear, listening, feeling, really questioning when you feel yourself in that, going down that rabbit hole. Why? What part of my wounding wants me to continue to suffer? What part of our collective wounding is still influencing my ability to react versus consciously respond to my environment? Right? Yeah. So watch for the light. Do they source their light from within? And you watch Zach Bush, and he's just all light. You can just feel him. You can see him. You just know, right? And then you see people who have to get their light from outside them. They need the accolades. They need the power, right? And I don't mean power, the power of love. I mean the control power. And I, just name a few politicians. And the term narcissist comes to mind, right? Like a pure narcissist is somebody who has no internal fountain of truth. Right. And that's, the fountain of youth is the fountain of truth. That's, oh God, that's good. Isn't that? We're going to write that one down. As it was coming up, I was like, oh, do I really get to say those words? That the fountain of youth is the fountain of truth, that we get to rebirth ourselves, that we get to expand our lifespan. Imagine what our human bodies, my nutritionists and health-loving friends, could do with a construct where we weren't steeped in fear, where we had good nutrition, that we didn't work 80-hour weeks, that our contributions were valuable and mattering in a whole new way of being on this planet. Imagine what happens to our lifespan, right? Like, it might not happen in my lifetime, but if I get to recycle, that's the fucking world I want to come back to.
Me too.
I'm working for the, they talk about the 7 generations. I know I'm going to be stuck out there in one of those generations. I want to do this shit now. I want to go all in on now so that I can be part of that, right? Like at the kingdom, the reward in heaven, it's the kingdom of now that we're here to show up for, to redeem ourselves from unconsciousness, to choose our words, to understand the power of words, to listen to people with greater levels of discernment, because we are just swimming in lies. We are just so steeped deep in that fear-based construct that lies are now the fuel of certainty. The more we lie, the more certain we are that we're going to be able to stay in control of this thing. Can you see how holding the big lie, this ability to take away the DNA of the United States, our one person, one vote, I can just see the whole electoral college is going to fail. We're going to have a different voting way. I mean, you can see how we have to evolve to that, because we can't exist where the spirit of our DNA, our co-creative desire to live in a country where all things are equal, no otherness, is going to run right up against the shadow of ideological supremacy. And that's my version of the language of what Zach is saying, is our idea that we are separate from Earth, that we are in some way ideologically advanced over this physical world. No, this physical world is us. She is our teacher. The plant medicines. Hello, they're the bridge. They move us to those.
He said humans cannot, well, he had a better quote than what I'm saying, but he said humans cannot survive on a sick planet.
No, we can't.
And it makes me think of the book I started rereading for Capra's, The Turning Point, where he talks about the 100 or 200 years for the rise and fall of civilizations, and we're in the fall, so we can recreate a better thing.
So exactly, we're in the fall, and the rise of plant medicines and these tools, so that we can tinker with our own brains. Our minds are brilliant. We've unpacked some really cool stuff about consciousness. We're learning about all of this inner guidance system now, and on a scientific level. It's measurable, it's quantifiable, and the mind can reconcile that which is quantifiable. We associate truth with quantifiability. That's our scientific way of orienting to the unfathomable. But what we're also finding is that we can measure the ineffable and begin to ease our trust, not for security outside of ourselves, but inside of ourselves. So yeah. It's a process. You got to step way back, big, huge lens of love. And you guys are a big part of that for me. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I love you both so much. And I'll get this recorded, and I don't know where I'm going to be next week. I have some ideas, some activities. So I'll publish in the next day or so what's coming next. And Kent, I just love you, brother. It's a week since we were in sacred space together, and I'm just so glad to see.
Week. There's no going back.
Well, and that's it. You cannot unring that resonant bell of truth within yourself. And there's a vitality, a youthfulness. Truly, the fountain of youth is our fountain of truth from inside. You look younger to me tonight. That picture I took of you when we were in Grace together is my favorite picture to look at now. I showed it to Stephen, and he goes, "That is a happy man." I said, we had a good conversation. We had a very
after I brushed my teeth this whole week, I looked in the mirror and I actually smile at myself. It's like, wow. that's
smile more. You did smile more.
Yes. Yeah. There's just a lightness about you. So I just want to reflect that back to you. I see you, brother. I see you holding that trust.
And I see me finally.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe
There's an ease in saying that.
Ooh, and you don't second guess it. Trust it. Fall in love with trust. It's falling in love with yourself. Truly, that's what it is. All right, you guys, I love you both. Sleep well. See you soon.
Thank you, Edie.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.